Mr. President, nobody in our country should ever be above the law. Certainly not powerful people who believe that they can perpetrate crimes on victims and get away with it because they have so much wealth and so many lawyers and so many friends in high places. If you go outside the doors of the Senate chamber to my right, and you continue straight ahead, and you go out the second set of doors, the steps of the Capitol, you're looking straight across at the Supreme Court. And while scaffolding is up right now, making it hard to see the words that are engraved above those pillars are those words, equal justice under law. Powerful words, a powerful vision that all Americans are subject to the law. There's no special get-out-of-jail-free card under that vision for the powerful. But all too often, the combination of reams of well-paid lawyers and a whole lot of friends ready to help you, the powerful commit crimes and get away from it. We should aspire to the vision that is there above the Supreme Court, that vision of equal justice under law, that no politician, no celebrity, no mega millionaire or billionaire can buy their way out of justice when they commit crimes, and particularly not crimes that involve life-altering damage, crimes in which people are killed, crimes in which people are mutilated, crimes in which people are raped. No matter how powerful someone is, they need to be prosecuted when they commit these crimes. And the American people have a right to know what information the government is suppressing to protect these individuals. So this brings us to the conversation of the Epstein Files. There's only one right answer: complete and total disclosure. That's the only pathway to justice. We have a lot of suspicions across this country about what is contained in those files hidden in the Department of Justice, those files that are hidden in the Department of the Treasury. My colleague, Senator Wyden, on the Finance Committee, has been working on this for years. I heard an objection from across the aisle. Why are you interested now? Well, Senator Wyden has been leading this search to understand what went on. There's $1 billion of money that was transferred. Thousands of transfers that were ignored by key banks that would have painted a portrait of criminal empire in motion. And yet somehow, none of those transfers triggered the attention that they merited. So here's what we know. We know that Epstein ran a massive network of sex trafficking of young girls to powerful men. Now, we don't know the who's are in terms of those powerful men, and there may be many names in the files, the Epstein files, that involve people who had nothing to do with those crimes. They may simply be friends in a network. They may have been business associates in some other legitimate way. But some of them may well be these powerful men who raped young girls. So those folks who were not part of that shouldn't be objecting to the release of the files, because the files will simply show that they had nothing to do with those crimes against young women. But the folks who were the perpetrators, whose names might be in that file, right now I can guarantee you, they're working the system of every high friend across this country, every mega millionaire and billionaire who participated in these violent acts on the innocent young, and they're trying to make sure this information never comes out. And so far, they have succeeded. And that is wrong. Several of my colleagues are preparing to speak to this, and Senator Durbin I'm looking to see that he's here. Yes, he is going to speak to it next. My colleague from across the aisle is here to respond to a request to hear and vote on a bill that will tell the Department of Justice, you must release these files. Transparency must happen. Now, why did I write this bill? I wrote this bill because the Attorney General said, we don't have legal permission to release the information. So let's give her the legal permission to release this information. In fact, let's pass a law right now, today, here in the Senate that says you not only have permission to release the Epstein files, but we are passing a law saying you must release the Epstein files with the names of the victims redacted to protect them. So, as if in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Judiciary be discharged and the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of Senate Bill 2557. Further, the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
I recognize the Majority Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reserving the right to object, Senate Republicans included a provision to address this very issue in an appropriation bill that Democrats blocked earlier this week. This issue would have been addressed here on the United States Senate floor, yet Senate Democrats came to the floor and objected to what was in this bill having to do appropriations and dealing with the funding of the government of the United States. And the shutdown Democrats who want to shut down the government did exactly, they objected to the appropriations bill that addressed this very item. That's what happened. And what's really happening today, we're here on a Saturday morning in August, on the floor of the United States Senate, and why are we here? We are here because Democrats are still trying to distract from the unprecedented obstruction of President Trump's well-qualified nominees. As of this morning, there are still 154 qualified nominees awaiting confirmation in the United States Senate. Many have been approved in committee with Democrat support, bipartisan support, in many cases strong bipartisan support. These are not controversial individuals, but patriotic Americans patiently waiting for their opportunity to serve our nation. So far this year, Democrats have allowed exactly zero nominees to be confirmed by voice vote. This is a drastic departure from the norms and the traditions of the United States Senate. It's very different from how Republicans treated Democrat nominees when we were in the minority in 2021. We would continue to work with the other side to reach a fair agreement to end this blockade. I'm hopeful that an agreement is within reach, and I objected to this exact legislation 4 days ago. Nothing has changed since Senator Merkley brought this to the floor 4 days ago, other than we continue to be here with an obstruction, a historic obstruction, by the Democrats of President Trump's qualified nominees, and therefore, Mr. President, I object.
The objection is heard.
My colleague has come to the floor.
I recognize the senator from Oregon.
Thank you. My colleague's come to the floor and said that there is a provision in a bill, but would he yield to a question about that provision? He will not, because he has just left the floor, because he doesn't want to answer the question. But I invite him to come back, because the provision he's talking about does not require the release of the Epstein files. Not at all. And so he's come to the floor and he said, Democrats blocked a provision, and he won't tell you what I'm telling you right now, that provision does not require the release of the Epstein files. So it is misrepresenting the situation. And you saw him change the topic. Why change the topic from this topic? Americans have been very clear that they want these files released. This is the bill that will do it, and I yield to my colleague from Illinois.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Illinois.
I thank the senator from Oregon for his leadership on this bill, which I'm proud to co-sponsor. I want to respond to my friend and colleague from the state of Wyoming and say when he goes back in time looking at the votes on nominees, don't overlook the J.D. Vance precedent. J.D. Vance, then Senator from Ohio, came to the floor of the United States Senate and objected to any type of vocal arrangement, oral vote, when it came to the approval of U.S. attorneys. He said that he wanted all of them to go through the regular order. That stopped under President Biden, the appointment of all U.S. attorneys. So to argue that they have clean hands in this situation is to ignore the Vice President's former status, establishing a standard that made it impossible to consider U.S. attorneys on a voice vote. Let me say about the issue before us on Epstein. 2 weeks after the Senate confirmed Pam Bondi as Attorney General, she told Fox News, the mothership, the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients was sitting on my desk right now to review. 6 days later, Bondi released a binder of documents related to these mega influencers. But these documents were largely already publicly available. The absence of any client list led to immense blowback. Attorney General Bondi returned to Fox News and made another startling claim. She said that a whistleblower told her the FBI withheld, quote, thousands of pages of documents, and the country would see, quote, the full Epstein Files. Over the next 4 months, DOJ and FBI were silent on the issue until an unsigned July 7th memo was issued, finding that, quote, systemic review revealed no incriminating client list. So what happened during the 4 months between Attorney General Bondi's blockbuster claims in February and this July 7th memorandum? My office received a highly credible whistleblower disclosure describing Attorney General Bondi's pressure on the FBI to quickly review and produce more Epstein documents. For 2 weeks in late March, the FBI assigned approximately 1,000 professional personnel in its information division and hundreds of additional agents from the New York field office to work 24-hour shifts to review and produce more documents. These officials were told to, quote, flag any records which mentioned President Trump. Essentially, agents were pulled out of the field from their work combating violent crime to review these documents. Other important work was effectively shut down. Using tens of thousands of personnel hours at the expense of public safety for no other reason than try to bolster baseless claims they made is reckless. President Trump has not helped the situation. Despite his administration continuing making promises about transparency on Epstein and the existence of records they have not produced, he's currently telling the country that it's all, quote, a scam. Last month, President Trump posted on his personal social media that, quote, my past supporters have bought into this BS hook, line, and sinker. They haven't learned their lesson and probably never will. This is the way the president is talking about his own constituents who are raising concerns about the claims that President Trump's own administration have repeatedly raised. President Trump and Attorney General Bondi are directly responsible for this confusion and mistrust. They owe Congress and the American people full transparency. Instead, the situation gets more murky when Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, is being interviewed by one of the highest-ranking members of the administration. We don't know what the conversation is. We sent a letter and said we want full disclosure to both sides of the aisle of what they discussed, and we want to make sure there are no promises of pardon and clemency for her to speak. She's serving a 20-year term for human trafficking and exploitation of children. The prosecutor said she was not a credible witness, and that we ought to take that into consideration when we consider her role. So I support Senator Merkley's bill. I'm sorry there was an objection. I yield the floor.
I recognize the senator from Idaho. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
I recognize the senator from Connecticut.
The American people have been...
Senator, we're in a quorum call.
I ask that the quorum call be lifted.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. The American people have been treated to an extraordinary spectacle. It is the spectacle of a president of the United States trying to stonewall and stall the disclosure of a file from the United States Department of Justice that directly implicates him and others in places of power after boasting to the American people that he would reveal everything. He promised again and again and again that he would disclose all the files, not only of this investigation, but the JFK investigation and others, because the American people deserve transparency. They deserve disclosure. They deserve to know what is in the files of the Department of Justice when there are credible allegations that an investigation is incomplete and potential evidence concealed. And the American people are rightly asking now, what do they have to hide? Why are they concealing this information in the files of the Department of Justice? We're talking about documents, interviews, testimony that may mention the survivors and innocent people, and their names should be redacted and removed from any public disclosure so that they are not victimized again by the public ignominy of having been victims. And if there is any ongoing investigation here that requires confidentiality, it can be held. I know from my days in the Department of Justice, I was the United States Attorney for Connecticut, that this kind of disclosure is done, not routinely, not commonly, but in exactly this kind of instance when the credibility of the Department of Justice may be at stake and people deserve to know the truth. And here, let's be very blunt, there are questions about whether this investigation and prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell was full and complete. There are names, some of them rich and powerful people. There are stories, some of them believable. There are places and locations, there are testimony that describe a situation that may be much broader than just these two individuals who have been prosecuted. And at the end of the day, we're talking here not about just legalities and about politics. We're talking about girls, the youngest victims, and some of them survivors. The president referred to them as beautiful women. On the younger side, some of them, well, some of them were actually not even women, they were girls. This crime is about the most heinous kind of exploitation of women, predatory victimization of girls, in effect, trafficking them, which was Maxwell's specialty. And the president has said that they may have stolen some of them from his spa as if they were chattel to be bought and sold. But that was the attitude that Epstein and Maxwell had toward them. And sadly, that was the attitude that perhaps some of their aiders and bettors or co-conspirators or simply enablers had as well. This action about disclosure is necessary now because the administration continues to stonewall and stall, concealing information and betraying its promise to the American people. And what's at stake here is not just the president's promises, although they are absolutely clear when he said, quote, President Trump says he will declassify the 9/11 files, JFK files, Epstein files, end quote. That's President Trump. What's at stake here is the credibility of our justice system. That's why an act of Congress is not only appropriate but necessary. And what's at stake here is also the victim. This crime involved money laundering. It involved financial illegality. It involved fraud against the government. It involved a range of crimes that may sound abstract, even technical, but at the end of the day, it was not a victimless crime. It was about exploiting girls, young women, girls who were mercilessly and repeatedly subject to abuse and trafficking. Donald Trump has broken these promises, but he's also remained actively engaged in a cover-up. That's why he sent his Deputy Attorney General to interview Maxwell for 2 days. Unprecedented, absolutely mind-boggling to send the Deputy Attorney General, who may then be a witness and potentially implicated in a cover-up, to interview a vital witness. We don't know who was with him, but we have to believe there were notes or recordings. They ought to be disclosed as well. And we should require that the disclosure be immediate, as this legislation would require. That Deputy Attorney General also happens to be the President's personal lawyer, or he was in all his criminal prosecution. That is unprecedented as well. The American people deserve an end to this stonewalling and stalling, and that is why, as if in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Judiciary be discharged and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-2557. Further, that the bill be considered and read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
I recognize the Majority Whip.
I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I yield to my colleague, Senator Wyden.
President,
I recognize the Senator
we've
from
been
Oregon.
looking at this for well over 3 years now. And what I'd like to do, my colleagues, Senator Merkley, all of my colleagues making important points, wanted to just take stock of where things stand. The Trump administration came in promising radical transparency on Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the fact is the Epstein files are being suppressed, and the administration is obstructing oversight from the Congress. The President's story about his relationship with Epstein changes by the day, and that's true of his administration as well. His personal lawyer went to talk to Ms. Maxwell, and who knows what was said in that conversation. What we do know is Maxwell has been moved, Epstein's partner in crime, to a minimum security prison without giving any good reason as to why a child sex trafficker deserves that additional comfort. House Republicans seem no longer interested in having Maxwell testify. Yesterday, it was reported that a member of Donald Trump's inner circle gave a high-paying job to another close Epstein associate, a man named Mr. Indike. That sounds, Mr. President, about as bizarre and wrong as you can get. My colleagues and I believe it's a big mistake for the Senate to go out of session without making real progress on real transparency on the Epstein issue. There are a number of ways you can do that. So let me say a little bit about our investigation, which began 3.5 years ago, Mr. President. So it's been looked at by Democrats and Republicans. From the outset, it's been built on the fact that you've got to follow the money to be at the core of this global sex trafficking operation, which, on the basis of what we have seen, has been funded lavishly. We began by examining the financial ties between Mr. Epstein and a Wall Street titan named Leon Black. We found that Black paid Epstein $170 million over just a couple of years. He said it was, quote, for tax and estate planning. The central claim, though, was what's noteworthy, Mr. President. The claim was that Mr. Epstein was a financial wizard, some superstar in terms of looking at taxes and estates, and he could perform accounting miracles. It appears this kind of work for Black and others was one of Mr. Epstein's biggest sources of income. Now here's the catch. Epstein wasn't an accountant or a tax attorney at all. And Leon Black, who's extraordinarily well off, already employed the best tax advisors in the business. He didn't need Mr. Epstein to handle his money. Black's lawyers even told our investigators, and let me just keep it brief, that Epstein's work wasn't very impressive. He made mistakes, and his work needed to be double-checked by people who were actually tax experts. So Mr. Black was paying Mr. Epstein more than double the income of the average Fortune 500 CEO. And Mr. Black wasn't the only one paying Mr. Epstein top dollar for this so-called financial advice. That's where we've got to go to follow the money. Last year, my investigators went to the Treasury Department and reviewed thousands of bank documents related to Mr. Epstein's financing. We've spoken at length about those documents here on the Senate floor. It's a whole set of Epstein files in the possession of the Treasury Department, above and beyond the files in the possession of the Department of Justice. So that's a key point, Mr. President. You've got to look, if you're going to follow the money, at the Treasury Department, not just at the Department of Justice. We've been trying to get those documents. The Trump administration's been blocking us. We've demanded answers from the new head of the IRS about why its criminal investigators didn't look into Epstein's work for Leon Black or whether they did any investigation of Epstein at all. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars paid by ultra-wealthy individuals to a known sex trafficker for the purpose of dodging billions in taxes. It is unthinkable that those transactions were never audited or investigated. A deep dive on this, starting with the IRS criminal investigations operation, could have blown the lid off Epstein's cover story about being a financial genius quite some time ago. It could have helped uncover the financing behind these horrific crimes. One last point in terms of an update. There are all kinds of pundits out there chattering about whether this is the right political issue to focus on. My message is blunt, Mr. President. This is not about politics. This is not about Democrats and Republicans. So I just want to make it clear this is about whether there's going to be justice for the victims of a notorious sex trafficker who did not abuse these women and girls alone. This is about whether there's going to be accountability for the people who enabled and participated in Epstein's crimes. The question really is, as I close, who is the government looking out for? The rich and powerful, even those who do horrible things, or the powerless, the victims of abuse who've been neglected for too long? Donald Trump wants this to go away without any accountability. And for him, that might be about self-preservation. But it's clear the Trump administration, based on our detailed work, doesn't want to do the right thing here. I'm 3.5 years into my investigation of one aspect of the Epstein story because there ought to be accountability and justice for the victims. So I am here to bring my colleagues up to date on our investigation. There will be more this summer, particularly about the Treasury Department, which is sitting on thousands and thousands of Epstein documents of its own, and they shouldn't be allowed to skate on this. We are going to keep investigating. We're going to keep the pressure on because this is not about blue. It's not about red. It's about doing the right thing and making sure something like this doesn't happen again. Senator Merkley and my colleagues are doing the right thing today, and I want it understood as somebody who's led this investigation for more than 3.5 years, I support them strongly, and I yield the floor.
I recognize the senator from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we can and certainly should all agree that the case of Jeffrey Epstein is deeply disturbing, with horrifying abuse of young women and girls. From the lenient plea deal he received in Florida in 2008 to the end of his case with the death in prison, survivors of his abuse have been denied the full accounting of his crimes and the justice that they deserve. It's also clear that a lack of transparency and accountability and contradictory statements by the Trump administration and its officials has led to even deeper public distrust of our justice system and especially the handling of this case. After all, Trump administration officials, including Attorney General Bondi, promised transparency in this case, but instead gave the American people a binder of largely already public documents. It was a sham. Last month, the Department of Justice released a 2-page memo informing the American public that the department had completed its exhaustive review of the Epstein Files and concluded that, quote, no further disclosure would be appropriate or warranted, unquote. We shouldn't be taking the word of any official in any administration on face value. The public should see these documents for themselves. And people ranging from the victims to the American public believe transparency is warranted, and it is. Just 3 days after the Department of Justice memo was published, the Senate Appropriations Committee unanimously agreed to an amendment I proposed to the Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies Appropriation Bill that would require 2 things. It would require the department to retain, preserve, and compile the Epstein files and submit a report with the files to the respective subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. I understood that earlier today, Senator Barrasso made the point that that Commerce, Justice, Science bill, Appropriations bill, was on the floor, and that I objected to moving forward with that bill, as I did for totally unrelated reasons. We also know that appropriation bills take a very long time to wind through the United States process, congressional process. Got to go through the House. It could be months before that provision, if it continues to be in there, sees the light of day. It shouldn't take months. We should do it now, which is why the day after the Senate Appropriations Committee unanimously, Republicans and Democrats together, supported that provision to require the report and to preserve the documents, Senator Durbin and I wrote to the Attorney General and said, why wait? And that's the question, Mr. President. Why wait? The victims, the American people, they deserve to see the files and know the full truth, and they deserve it right now. Just this morning, there was a new report in Bloomberg. The headline says, the FBI redacted Trump's name in the Epstein files. We've always understood that Donald Trump's name was in the files. What we're learning today, at least according to these reports, is that the FBI redacted Donald Trump's name from those files. The question is, why? Nobody's name should be redacted from the files with respect to the perpetrators of these crimes. Clearly, in releasing files, we need to protect the names of any victims, but the perpetrators, we should know about their names. They should not be redacted. What we've seen, of course, from the president is an effort to change the subject entirely, say that it was the Obama administration that somehow invented this whole dispute and debate. Well, we know that's not true. We know that's not true because of what President Trump has previously said and, of course, what his Attorney General has said. It's also deeply concerning that the Deputy Attorney General of the United States of America, who previously was Donald Trump's personal lawyer, skirted all the Department of Justice protocols and went down to secretly interview Ghislaine Maxwell for hours over a couple days. I think we should have the transcript of that interview as well. We've also heard President Trump say that he has the power to pardon Ghislaine Maxwell. Well, it's one thing to have the power, it's another thing to speculate publicly about using that power to pardon somebody who could testify in an incriminating way against all of the perpetrators. That reeks of a hint of the obstruction of justice. To signal to Ghislaine Maxwell that if she says the right things, the President of the United States could pardon her, that would be a corruption of the judicial process, a gross corruption of the judicial process. So I hope President Trump will immediately announce that he won't pardon this person, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the associate of Jeffrey Epstein in perpetrating these crimes against young women and girls. The President of the United States should announce today that he will not do that. That's the way the President can put an end to the understandable concern that he is signaling that if she says the right thing regarding him, that she'll get a get out of jail free card. That would be a gross corruption of the process and of the justice system. So this is why we should do now what the victims deserve and what the American public demands, which is to support the proposal put forward by the Senator of Oregon, Senator Merkley. And so, if in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Judiciary be discharged and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-2557, further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Wyoming.
I object.
Objection noted. Senator from Oregon.
I would.
So did I understand you to say that the President of the United States has put forward the possibility of a favor to someone who could testify about the Epstein's conduct over many years?
The President of the United States, when asked if he could pardon Ghislaine Maxwell, said, yes, he has the power to do that pardon, to make that pardon. And her attorneys have made very clear through multiple public remarks that they would welcome that. And of course her attorneys would welcome that. She would love to get out of jail free. And so this is why the President today should make very clear that he will not pardon Ghislaine Maxwell because she was close associate in the crimes that she and Jeffrey Epstein committed.
any ordinary world, wouldn't this be considered witness tampering?
Certainly if the President of the United States is signaling to Ghislaine Maxwell and her attorneys that he would provide a pardon without any possible reason to do so other than for her to give testimony. In this case, it would be false testimony because we know about the close association between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. That would clearly be witness tampering.
And to my colleague from Maryland, did you also mention that the FBI redacted President Trump's name from certain documents?
I did indeed, and this is a report that just came out. The headline is "The FBI Redacted Trump's Name in the Epstein Files." It's a Bloomberg report, and it's just one more example of what appears to be an effort to cover up any role that Donald Trump may have played in these crimes. Again, we don't know, and the best way for us all to know is to support your effort here, to support our mutual efforts, which is to just release the files.
So I so much appreciate your amendment, which we advocated for, which you presented very well in the Appropriations Committee, that said all the files have to be retained so that nothing is destroyed. No missing minutes on a White House tape or anything equivalent. Why is it necessary to express this concern?
Well, the concern, of course, is that the Trump administration would be tempted to destroy these files for the purposes of getting rid of evidence. As I indicated, reports today indicate that the FBI, and again, I don't know if they were instructed to do so. I do not know all the circumstances. What we do know are the reports from Bloomberg that Donald Trump's name was stricken from the files.
If that is accurate, I'm just trying to understand why they would do so. If his name is in the files and it's simply in the context of he attended a certain event, something of that nature, or maybe Mr. Epstein went to an event at one of the president's properties, that would be a completely innocent role. Why would the FBI redact such a reference?
Well, I think that's a question for all of us to ask the FBI, and we should follow up and ask the FBI. In the meantime, though, the best way, as you pointed out, and all of us have pointed out, and even Attorney General Bondi at one point pointed out, is just release the damn files. That's how we would get to the bottom of all of this. And don't redact anything from the files except to protect victims. But perpetrators should not have their names redacted from the files.
Absolutely. Well, I so appreciate you bringing this additional information to bear. Our colleague across the aisle who objected noted that the Republicans also voted for this amendment, your amendment, in committee. So I'm wondering if we bring it back as a UC, as a bill to pass right now, saying all information is retained. I wonder if our Republican colleagues would join us in that effort.
Well, that's a very good point the Senator raises. We had a unanimous bipartisan vote in the Senate Appropriations Committee on an amendment to do exactly that, to make sure the records were preserved so nobody tries to destroy evidence. And it required an exhaustive report detailing many of the questions that we have all raised regarding the Epstein files. As I said, the appropriations process takes a very long time to wind through the United States Congress, and there's no reason to wait on this. Again, if a majority of the Appropriations Committee, not just a majority, a unanimous vote in the Appropriations Committee took place, we could actually get this out right away, and hopefully the House would pass that, and then we could send it right to the President's desk.
Well, I do hope you'll bring that back as a unanimous consent request later today. based on your amendment to retain all the files. We've already heard our colleagues object to releasing the files, but certainly they should join us in a unanimous way in retaining all the evidence.
We certainly, and more importantly, the American people and especially the victims deserve to know that nobody will tamper with the files between now and the moment they're released. Again, the fastest way to address this issue, to meet the concerns, to meet the terrible, terrible abuse that was visited upon these young women and girls, is simply to release the files and do it now.
Mr. President, a point of information, are we going to proceed with a vote at 12 noon?
Time expires at 12:46.
At 12:46. Thank you for that information. And I believe Senator Merkley has come to the floor to make some comments. I will just close with this notation. All across America, ordinary men and women know that if they commit a crime, they'll pay the fine. If they commit a crime, they'll do the time. They don't have fancy lawyers. They don't have friends in high places. They don't have the FBI redacting their name from documents. They don't have one caucus of the U.S. Senate blocking information from being released. On behalf of every ordinary citizen across America, we are going to continue to press for the powerful and the rich to be accountable. If they, in fact, participated in the abuse of young women, in the rape of young women, we want them brought to justice, no matter what political party or what bank account they have, what part of the country they live in, or what friends they have. Thank you, Mr. President.